As a constitutional law attorney, former senior legal advisor, and personal counsel to President Donald J. Trump, Jenna Ellis believes in the rule of law and the importance of integrity in our elections. And she's ready to tackle the big cultural and legal issues facing America. This is the Jenna Ellis Show. Here is your host, Jenna Ellis.
Hi, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Jenna Ellis Show. I'm so excited today to have my good friend Joel Rosenberg on to talk about his brand new book, Enemies and Allies. He has been a great friend and a great foreign correspondent from Israel. He knows a lot about the history not only of Israel and foreign policy and the interactions between the United States and why the U.S. absolutely should continue to support Israel, but also from his own perspective, being a member of the Jewish community and understanding, not just from a political perspective, but also as a Christian from the theological and biblical perspective. He has wrote a number of bestsellers, some excellent books, and I would highly encourage you to follow his work. He's the editor-in-chief of All Israel News and is deeply invested in not only providing great commentary on what's happening in Israel and the Middle East, but also giving that from a truthful and biblical perspective. So before we get to his interview, we also have to talk about the fact that the Biden administration has caused a financial crisis and they have no clue how to fix it. Oil prices have skyrocketed, and when oil prices go up, not only do your expenses go up, but the cost of transportation and shipping spikes, leading the prices of goods to rise. We're already seeing record inflation, and that's the very last thing that we need. Our economy is in trouble, and you need to take steps to protect yourself and your retirement. So if all your money is tied up in stocks, bonds, and traditional markets, you may be vulnerable. And gold is one of the best ways to protect your retirement. No matter what happens, you own your own gold. It's real, it's physical, and it's always been valuable since the dawn of time. Legacy Precious Metals is the company that I trust for investing in gold. They can help you roll your retirement account into a gold-backed IRA where you still own the physical gold. They can also ship gold and precious metals safely and securely to your house. So call Legacy today at 866-528-1903 or visit them online at legacypminvestments.com. That's 866-528-1903 or visit them online at legacypminvestments.com where you can download the free investor's guide. And joining me now is my good friend Joel Rosenberg, who we were just chatting before the broadcast that I think the last time I saw you in person was at the National Religious Broadcasters last year. So we need to remedy that very soon. And you're over in Israel now in Jerusalem?
Yeah, that's where we live, and I'm speaking to you from my home office / studio. And shalom from Jerusalem. It's great to be with you again, at least in an interview.
Yeah, absolutely. And so hopefully either you can come this way or I would love to visit Jerusalem again. I've been there to the Holy Lands only once in my life, and It was such an amazing experience. And to be there in the places that Jesus walked and understanding the depth of Scripture from an immersive perspective like that. The tour guide, who was a Messianic Jew, which was, of course, wonderful for that experience. As we were going up to Jerusalem for the first time, he said to us, "You've read the Bible in black and white, and now you'll read in color."
Yeah.
And I loved that.
It really is. It's like enjoying your favorite movie on your phone and then watching it in IMAX. And you're stepping into the story. And one of the exciting things is after the horrible last few years with COVID and all the restrictions that have come with it, some maybe fair and good and others insane, but Israel is beginning to reopen now. And what we're watching is, in fact, our news service, All Israel News, is reporting that a lot of major Christian leaders, pastors, ministry leaders are now setting their tour dates for 2022 and heading into 2023. We're really starting to see, we haven't seen any of them arrive yet, but they're beginning. Max Lucado and Chuck Swindoll and Pastor Skip Heitzig in Albuquerque and others. And so it's encouraging. And tourists are allowed to come back. There are some restrictions in terms of vaccination stuff, so we're not out of the woods yet. It's not total freedom to just come and go as one pleases, but we're moving finally in the right direction. And you're right, it's one of the most incredibly exciting experiences to come for the first or second or third time, and you think, it'd be like if you were a J.R.R. Tolkien fan and you're seeing street signs that say this way to the Shire, this way to Mount Doom, this way to, wherever. And you're thinking, that's a real place. It's so mythic in our minds and our hearts as Americans, as Christians, as Jews, as others, that we think that can't be real. I can't actually be rolling into Jerusalem or to Nazareth or to Jericho or Bethlehem. And so it's pretty cool. And of course, to live here, it's even better, but it never loses its magic.
Yeah, and I love that analogy because it's so true that often Christians, especially, those of us who haven't been able to live and experience Israel, even some, for the first time, yet you almost do think of Scripture and some of what we typify as stories in the Bible as less than real places or historically accurate. And we do think of it as almost mythological because we've heard these stories growing up, if you've grown up in a church, if you have a Christian community, but to come and see that it is actually a real place and the historicity of the Bible is profoundly real, it's accurate, and to understand that this is the scope of the story of history and truth and fact become alive. And that was something that in my own experience traveling to Jerusalem and especially going on the Sea of Galilee, taking that boat tour was one of the most fantastic experiences. And to actually contemplate that was the real physical location of the stories in the Bible that we sometimes do just take for granted as and unfortunately sometimes as fiction when they're really not. So I hope that I'll be able to come back and visit, and I know included in those.
I'd love to welcome you. Yeah, and you should come and do a week's worth of shows from here. There's such interesting people that we can line you up with. One of the things we're doing with our All Israel News and All Arab News websites, we're interviewing people in the government, people in archaeology, people in business and in culture, and of course in the faith communities. There's a growing and healthy and wonderful Christian community here, Messianic Jewish community, Jews who believe in Jesus. There's also fascinating rabbis who don't believe anything that I believe about Jesus or that you believe, but are still like, look, there's a lot we do agree on, and they're open to talking. So you'd have a treasure trove of guests that you could have on your program.
Great. Well, looking forward to that, and you'll be at the top of my list. And I know my Salem colleagues, Dinesh D'Souza and Sebastian Gorka, have also are looking at some dates to come, I think the end of this year. So I'm talking to them. Maybe, for the listeners, stay tuned a little bit to see whether or not I'll be able to join them. I'm looking at that on my calendar. That would be an excellent adventure. So definitely go and look at their tour. And that's on Sebastian Gorka's America First website. You can also go to, of course, his show and Dinesh's to get all of those dates and information. But if I can, that would be an amazing, amazing adventure. And, Joel, with your experience there and how prolific you have been in writing and also reporting the news out of Israel, you have a brand new book that is called Enemies and Allies, and it's taking the really fascinating story of the modern Middle East. So for those of us who maybe aren't familiar with some of the distinctions between the tensions that are going on currently that really have roots, well back into the Old Testament and biblical history, what made you, for purposes of this book, focus on that particular topic?
Well, as you know, Jenna, I am mostly known as a political thriller writer, writing novels, right? Making it up. It's fiction. It's usually about threats to the United States, to Israel, to our allies that come from radical Islamism. Although I have a novel that feels very much ripped from the headlines right now. It came out a few years ago called The Kremlin Conspiracy. When I talked with President Trump about it in the White House, he got a little nervous, but I was like, no, not the allegations against you. I'm talking about a Russian dictator threatening to invade his neighbors, and the U.S. trying to figure out how to stop that. We're watching that play out this winter with the threats from Putin related to Ukraine, but also possibly the Baltic states. But all that to say, this new book, Enemies and Allies, is nonfiction. I've written a few nonfiction books over the years, but this one was important to me. It was a passion of mine. Why? Because Enemies and Allies looks at where is the Middle East 20-some years after the horrific events of September 11th, 2001, right? That was a complete pivot point, a hinge in history. You can think of life before 9/11, and then you think of life after. You think of life before. Most Americans didn't really think about a threat of radical Islamists. They did, maybe things happen overseas, the Iranian Revolution, yada yada. But it was like, yep, that's bad, but that's not really a problem for us. That's really a problem for Israel. It's a problem for our Arab allies, but that's not a thing that we have to worry about. And 9/11 taught us, well, no, people in caves have figured out a way to turn American aircraft, jumbo jets, into missiles and to kill the most Americans in history, and certainly the worst sneak attack since 9/11. So the question became, since Pearl Harbor. So the question was, 20 years later, what are the threats that we face? Who are our enemies now? And because Al-Qaeda is a problem, but they're not the major threat that they were 20 years ago. ISIS is a problem, but it's not the type of threat it was 15 years ago, let's say, 10 years ago. So who are our enemies today, and who are our allies? We have a lot more allies in this part of the world than we used to. But the reason this book is unique, Jenna, and the main reason I did it was because over the last several years, 4 or 5 years, God has opened up some crazy interesting doors for me to go sit down and spend hours and hours and hours in the palaces all throughout the Middle East, meeting the kings, the crown princes, the presidents, and the prime ministers who aren't analyzing the rapid, sweeping tectonic changes in this region. They're the ones making the decisions. So I've led 6 evangelical leader delegations into the Arab world over the last 5 years. 2 of them to meet President El-Sisi in Egypt. 1 of them to meet King Abdullah in Jordan. 1 of them to meet the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed of the United Arab Emirates. And 2 trips to go meet the most controversial and I think consequential crown prince and leader in this part of the world, which is on the positive, on the ally side, which is Mohammed bin Salman, known as MBS, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia. So this book, Enemies and Allies, doesn't look from a distance and say, well, this is interesting, this is happening, that's happening. No. I take you into the motorcades. I take you into the palaces. I take you into the throne rooms, and you're hearing on the record, with all the notes that we took, the conversations that we're actually having with these leaders as well as the leaders of Israel. What do they think? What's the future? What's changing? Why are they making peace with Israel? So that's what makes this book unique, interesting, and it's the only book so far. It's the first book. It's the only book so far that tells the inside story of how the Abraham Accords came about, which of course was the greatest foreign policy success among many, but in my view, the greatest foreign policy success for the Trump-Pence administration was the brokering of not 1 or 2 or 3, but 4 Arab-Israeli peace deals. This is the book that tells the inside story.
Wow, and that is so fascinating. And for people who have supported the President Trump, and of course supported the Abraham Accords and understood what a monumental success for peace that was, and are now concerned moving into the Biden administration, and now a year later to see the difference in that administration's view and tenor toward Israel, toward the Middle East. First of all, I want to ask you, what do you think is, not to give away any spoilers, but the most fascinating part, or maybe just one tidbit from that book that will make people really want to get inside the motorcades and the throne rooms and so forth with you?
I think the most important element of Enemies and Allies is hearing each one of these major Arab Muslim leaders. These are Muslims. They're not Christians. I don't see the world the same as they do theologically. And on a number of political issues, we disagree. But what's fascinating is how consistent they are, that America is the good guys, that Israel is their ally, and that Iran and the world of radical Islamism is the problem. Right? If you look back 20 years ago, Jenna, you think, weren't the Saudis the problem? Weren't 15 of the 19 hijackers on 9/11, weren't they Saudi citizens? Wasn't Al-Qaeda invented by a Saudi, right? Osama bin Laden. Now, it's not that the Saudi government 21 years ago was for terrorism, but they had created a very permissive, very tolerant society for extremism for a number of reasons that I explain in the book. But now to sit and hear the heir to the throne of Saudi Arabia, the most powerful man in Saudi Arabia aside from his father, the king, who's fairly ill right now. So to hear the crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, say to me on the record that the leader of Iran, the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, is the new Hitler. That's his view, right? And that MBS has fired more than 3,500 extremist clerics from the mosques. That he is changing the textbooks to get rid of anti-Semitic, anti-Christian teachings that had been in Saudi textbooks forever. So, and then leader by leader, as you go through the region, you hear what they say about radical Islam, and but you also see all the evidence I pulled together that shows that these guys are really fighting actively with their intelligence services, with their media, with their air forces and ground troops. They're actually fighting the same enemies that we're fighting, and they're being effective at that. That is not something that was happening 21 years ago. That's a huge development, and it's not perfect. Don't get me wrong, but it's a huge change, and it's very encouraging.
Yeah, and I think that would actually surprise some people who maybe either haven't followed this as closely, obviously, as you have, or are just seeing some of the headlines. And so with those individuals and that type and tenor to actually be moving forward in an encouraging direction, a lot of Americans tend to be so myopically focused on, okay, well, what is America's view and role in all of this? How significant really in the world stage, not just in our own view, because we're here in America and, this is our country, how significant to all of these players is America's support of Israel?
Well, it's absolutely fundamental. There has been no greater ally of the Jewish people and the state of Israel since 1948 than the United States of America. The United States was the first country to officially recognize Israel's independence 11 minutes after our founding Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion declared independence on May 14th, 1948. President Harry Truman, a Democrat, but a good conservative on foreign policy.
Would probably be a Republican today, comparatively.
He would be a Republican today, yeah. But he made the decision. And his Secretary of State at the time said, no, we're getting our oil from the Arabs. You can't go support a mere 600,000 Jews that are starting their new country. No, that's crazy. Truman was raised as a Bible-believing Christian. He saw the horrors of the Holocaust. He knew what Bible prophecy taught, that Israel would be a country one day, and he decided we're in. It took time to see the United States form the closeness, the strategic alliance that we think of today. That really didn't come until Nixon, Kissinger in 1973, but even more with Ronald Reagan in the 1980s. Okay, but the whole U.S.-Israeli strategic alliance took a light-year leap forward under the Trump administration. President Trump, and I told him this in the Oval Office, and the conversation is in the book. Okay. And Jenna, and we're friends anyway, right? Because I was a never Trumper in 2016. I would be for the 18th of the 17 Republican candidates, I was like, I'll be for any other one, but I didn't see that Trump could do it. He had no foreign policy experience.
Like a lot of us. I mean, a lot of people didn't know him outside of his celebrity status. So to then consider him a politician and not really having any experience or background or context, a lot of genuine conservatives were very concerned. And thankfully, as we continued to get to know him, he ended up being, and I think both of us are some of his strongest supporters now, and even in the first few months of his presidency. And so it's a great thing when people surpass their expectations. But you're not alone in that view. I mean, people know that I was very openly a Cruz supporter initially, and thankfully he did not get elected as president. I'm so grateful that Donald Trump had what I think will be his first 4 years in his administration, and look forward to everything that is to come.
Well, that's exactly my story, and where I differ from those who were in the Never Trump camp in 2016 is I changed. And there are still, of course, a remnant of those who will say, I will never support Trump no matter what. And I said, listen, I still have disagreements with the president. There's things that I don't like or I disagree with. But one of the things that we have to be able to do is say, the Bible says, give honor where honor is due, give credit where credit is due. And I said to the president in this conversation, I told him I was a never Trumper. And you know the man way better than me. I don't think it happens that often that somebody actually uses the term never Trumper in the Oval Office with President Trump. They may say it outside, but they don't say it to his face. But he listened. I explained why I was. But then I said, but let me list the 11 or 12 things that you've done that has completely changed my view. Not that I still don't have some disagreements, but you really sort of stunned me that you've done these things. And I said, you will go down in history as the most pro-life and the most pro-Israel president in American history, even if that's all you do. Now, there's a lot more, but if you look at Israel, he moves the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. He declares Jerusalem the capital of the state of Israel. No other country had done it at that point. He declares the Golan Heights is sovereign Israeli territory. He tears up the insane and dangerous Iran nuclear deal. He imposes the maximum pressure sanctions campaign on Iran. He sells Israel F-35 advanced stealth fighters, and so on and so on and so on. It was really quite amazing. And then does something that almost nobody in Washington thought he could do, which was broker 4 Arab-Israeli peace agreements. And when you look at someone who many people, myself included, thought there's no way this guy has the knowledge, much less the experience, much less the fortitude to do any of that, and then he does it, you have to give that person credit. You don't have to give him a 100% grade, an A+ necessarily. There's other things that I would say, okay, well, I didn't like that, or there's too much spending, or there's this or that. But it's not healthy to not be able to see that you were wrong about something and that somebody way outperformed your expectations. And I think that's the flaw of the modern Never Trump movement.
Absolutely. And that's the honorable position, because if we're always comparing facts and our assessment of individuals to our principles, the principles don't change, but how we apply that to the facts. If the facts change or we learn new information, then that can change our assessment and analysis and critique ultimately of individuals. And it's also not an all or nothing. I feel like the Never Trumpers in the current era now, and especially throughout his presidency, just refused to acknowledge the good things, and they were so stubborn and arrogant in their position. They didn't want to be wrong. But those of us who are principled over our own ego would be able to say, wow, I'm glad that initially my assessment, not knowing the facts, not knowing also, having really no indication other than his promises. He didn't have a track record as a politician, so we didn't have anything else to go on except his promises. Once he started fulfilling those, then we can reassess and compare to our principles and say, wow, this is amazing. And it doesn't mean that, okay, therefore we support 100% of everything he's ever done in his entire life. And I don't think that anyone can support 100% of any of us, because we're all sinners. We all have failed. We also, a lot of us, like President Trump, have a past before he became a Christian, have a past while he was a Democrat. He changed his mind, and thankfully he did, and became a Republican, became a conservative. And I love the point that you emphasized, Joel, that was more of an expansive view of President Trump's perspective on pro-life, because so many of us in America look at that, I think, very narrowly in a very positive way to President Trump and say, okay, he attended the March for Life. He appointed conservative justices that hopefully this year will significantly undermine or overturn Roe versus Wade. That's huge. And I actually had a conversation with him the day that Roe versus Wade was argued. And I called him and said, I am so encouraged, Mr. President, that I think the greatest thing in the legacy of your first 4 years is that you are going to be so instrumental in overturning and undermining Roe versus Wade, and regardless of anything else, that is so significant, and thank you for that. And we had a conversation about that, and it was, I love President Trump, and I love all of the conversations I'm able to have with him. But that view,
I know you do. And you know, of course, that I missed you. That's the other thing. You and I almost saw each other at Mar-a-Lago in December. You were there, I think, on a Thursday night or a Wednesday night, and I was there on a Friday night having dinner with Chris Ruddy, head of Newsmax, founder of Newsmax, and the president came over and spent time with us at our table, and it was a fascinating conversation. It was off the record, so it was on Israel, it was on Iran, it was on the state of play in the United States and the state of play in the Middle East, and on what a pro-life leader he has been. And look, this is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to take readers in this book, Enemies and Allies, to not just to view the Middle East, which is complicated and it's high stakes. Everybody knows it's super important, but sometimes they're overwhelmed and they think, I don't understand it, and I know it's a big deal, but it's just too much. I don't even know where to begin. And so what I try to do is say, well, then come with me. Sort of jump on the plane, get in the motorcade, and let me introduce you to the very people that are changing history. Let's meet them. It's almost like a series of major magazine profiles, cover stories, where you're going into the White House and you're sitting down in the Oval Office. I've written so many novel scenes for my political thrillers about that events in that room. I'd never been in it. I'm 54 years old. I lived in Washington for 24 years, but I was always on the wrong side of whatever administration. Nobody was inviting me in, apparently. So to have the first ever meeting in the Oval Office with a president that I had not voted for until I did at the last moment, but I'm just saying, it had been against. But to have that conversation, and then multiple conversations with Vice President Pence, with Secretary Pompeo, you get a wide view of this administration, and you begin to see what was it about Trump that allowed him to break through and make 4 Middle East peace deals, Arab-Israeli peace deals, when none of his successors had done it for a quarter of a century. And I won't go into all of it, but I will make one point here, Jenna, my assessment in talking to all these people, including him, was that Trump essentially led with what I call the George Costanza doctrine. Trump and Jared Kushner and Pompeo and all the rest of the team looked at what all his predecessors had done and realized, as a deal maker, he was watching that they weren't making deals. Well, why? He wanted to understand, why is it really that a deal can't be done? And maybe it couldn't be done then, but have the conditions changed? And what's fascinating, he realized that every person before him had tried essentially the exact same strategy and gotten the same results, nothing. And so he decided to do what George Costanza does in one of the Jerry Seinfeld, programs, which is do the opposite, right? If everything you've done is wrong, then the opposite would have to be right. That's Jerry's famous line. And so Trump says, well, what would be the opposite of each of these moves that Obama and Biden made, that George W. Bush made, that Bill Clinton made, right? Going way back. And he concluded, well, let's try the opposite. And the opposite was to hug Israel, to get closer to Israel, to do more to show that we were standing with Israel, and to take a hard line against the crazies in Iran. Those two decisions, which are the exact opposite of the Obama-Biden decisions, where they created daylight with Israel and then went and gave $150 billion to the Iranian regime. By doing those two things, not only did they win over Israel, what else happened? The moderate Arab states, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, even Sudan, not to mention Jordan, Egypt, said, yes, this guy realizes, President Trump realizes that Israel is not the threat in the region. We don't agree with Israel on everything, but they're not the problem. Iran is the problem, and they must be dealt with not with firmness, not appeased. And this changed everything. There's one chapter in the book, Jen, I'll just note that 2 years before the Abraham Accords were announced, I'm sitting in Abu Dhabi, the capital of the United Arab Emirates. My delegation is with me, and we're talking to Mohammed bin Zayed, the crown prince who made that peace deal. Well, he told us in detail that why he was going to make peace with Israel, that he was going to make peace with Israel, and he said he was just looking for the right moment. The problem with it at the time, it was very exciting, but the problem was it was off the record at the time. So we were sitting on the biggest bombshell news story in the modern history of the Middle East. Another Arab country is about to make peace with Israel. We couldn't say anything, and we didn't, because we kept our word. But when that story erupted, right, when Trump announced on August 13th, 2020, that with Netanyahu on the phone and Mohammed bin Zayed on the phone, that this peace deal had happened, A, I wasn't surprised. B, our All Israel News website covered it in great detail. But the point is, I can now tell the inside story of what transpired. And again, I think a lot of Christians, a lot of Americans, conservatives, over the last 2 years have been understandably so focused on internal issues of the economy, of COVID, of race riots and race relations, of other types of riots. Of course, a dizzying and destructive and divisive political campaign. They didn't focus on the game-changing events that were happening in the Middle East. And so I think this book not only fits that moment where people are going, wow, we ought, now Biden is trying to make another deal with Iran. Is that good? Is that bad? And I profile Biden in this book as well. And he doesn't come out so well.
Yeah, probably not like anything else in the contrast of Biden versus Trump. But this book is amazing. It's excellent, and I appreciate you gave me a copy. I love it. I hope that everyone listening will get a copy of this, because it filled in, as you said, a lot of not just the gaps in the understanding, but I think having more of a circumspect view of what was going on in the administration and how President Trump's focus was absolutely America first, but understanding what that meant on the global stage and with our true allies and with the right moves in terms of foreign policy and understanding the United States position on the world stage. And so as we're looking forward, and just in the last few minutes I have with you, Joel, what can Americans, or what should Americans expect now moving forward in the Biden administration? Because as you just said, Biden's profile is not great, and unfortunately, we don't have President Trump right now in the Oval Office. So over the next 3 years, and looking forward to the midterms and then ultimately the 2024 election, what can we be encouraged by? What's a drawback? And how should we as Christians be praying for Israel?
Well, it's a great question, great series of questions, Jenna, and I'll try to be concise. First, in the book Enemies and Allies, I do profile Biden, and I really truly try to be fair. It's interesting because two of Joe Biden's closest friends, say this. The former Defense Secretary Bob Gates says of Biden, and I quote him in the book, "I love Joe Biden, and he's a great man. He's kind, he's compassionate. If I had a personal problem, I would call Joe Biden. I know he would help me. But on foreign policy and national security issues, he's been wrong on every one of them for the last 40 years." Now, I quote him because he's not an enemy of Biden, right? He's one of Biden's closest friends, saying the man's judgment is deeply flawed. Now, in fairness, I point out that Biden hasn't done everything wrong. He's very pro-Israel. He stands with Israel on the Iron Dome funding and missile defenses and other types of things. But he doesn't. But his judgment is so flawed that he doesn't understand Iran. He didn't understand Iraq. He clearly doesn't understand Afghanistan. But here's another one that I actually didn't remember, honestly, to put it in the book. And I'm going to be honest with you, Jenna, as I always try to be.
The sequel is coming up.
Barack Obama, who asked Joe Biden to be his running mate, right? And they spent 8 years together. President Obama said on the record that never underestimate Joe Biden's ability to F up the situation. These are two friends of his. Okay, so we really have to understand that Joe Biden means well. I'm not challenging or questioning his motives. I'm questioning his judgment, and I explain, even though I didn't even remember the Biden or the Obama quote. I should have, but using the other quote, I explain what risks are ahead. Okay, and we already saw the risk in Afghanistan. That because Joe Biden thinks he understands the region, okay, he thinks he's been around Washington for 50 years, so he thinks he is an expert. The problem is he has incompetence matched with hubris. Okay, I said this on Eric Metaxas' show a couple days ago, or in December. It's incompetence, which is bad enough, but when you match it with arrogance, you think you know what you're doing and you don't. And so everybody in the Middle East policy world told Joe Biden, don't surrender to the Taliban. Don't pull out the last stick in the Jenga game. But Biden was sure that it would be fine, and he pulled it out, and the whole thing collapsed. And that single surrender to a terrorist organization in a country we had already won has emboldened all of America's enemies and rattled all of America's allies. And not just in the Middle East, but all over the world. So we've got to be praying for the peace of Jerusalem, the peace of Israel. And we got to pray that the Abraham Accords expands. The country to watch for, I think, there are several, but the main one would be Saudi Arabia. Can Israel and Saudi Arabia make a deal? That would be historic. I mean, really, really, to quote President Trump, it'd be huge. Okay, I mean, really, it would be really huge. So, but really, we're in a high-risk situation. In the Middle East, Iran feels emboldened. And I'll just wrap up with these three quick, super fast points. Iran is thinking, we're so close to building nuclear weapons. We got scared by Trump because we thought he might bomb the crap out of us. So we'd better hold back. But now with Biden, we don't think he's going to do anything. So maybe we should go for it. Maybe we should go for the bomb. That's problem number one. Problem number two is Vladimir Putin actually worried that Trump, for all the talk that, Trump was in bed with Putin and all this kind of crazy talk, Trump was actually tougher on Putin than the Obama administration was. And so Putin, Trump was so unpredictable that Putin wasn't sure if he could take aggressive action because he thought Trump just might go crazy he talks nice, but he might actually stop me. So Putin was quiet mostly in the Trump administration. Now he's getting ready with 100,000 troops to possibly invade Ukraine and maybe the Baltic. So then the third one was the Chinese, of course, the communist Chinese knew that Trump had their number, was negotiating tough with them, was putting more U.S. forces out in the Pacific. And the Chinese were very cautious because they weren't sure if they made a misstep that Trump might actually do something. They don't worry about Biden, and they're trying to decide, should we just go seize Taiwan? We've wanted it forever. Maybe this is the moment. This is incredibly dangerous, Jenna. All of our worst enemies are looking around going, maybe this is the moment. This is the moment. And that's what an election, that's the consequence of an election. And especially as crazy a one as 2020.
Yeah. And on that note, we could talk so much more on that, and you and I certainly have. But these are some fascinating insights. I hope that everyone gets your book, Enemies and Allies. It's on Amazon, anywhere else books are sold, and also
on audio. So people say,
great.
I don't have time. Fine, get it on your phone, on Audible, or whatever service you like, and listen to it while you're driving to the store, driving your kids to school, driving wherever, doing errands.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. So, well, thank you so much for your insights, and definitely we'll have you back on, as obviously there's so much going on between all of these different players, and I always love to have your insights, and thank you so much, and may God continue to bless America, to bless Israel, and for the remnant of us who are still standing strong and standing firm, even in the midst of these really, really difficult times.
Well, Jenna, I appreciate it, and I appreciate your friendship towards Israel and that alliance. And I'll just close by saying the book, of course, gives the big picture. The day-to-day movement, that's still an ongoing story, and that's why I started the website All Israel News. People can find it at allisrael.com. You can follow us on Twitter, but you can also sign up for our free email newsletter, which comes out every day or two with all the breaking stories, all the major stories, allisrael.com. I hope it becomes a resource for you and all of your listeners.
Yeah, and it's fantastic. And I tweet a lot of your articles, but definitely follow Joel on Twitter and other social platforms at Joel C. Rosenberg and All Israel News as well. And thank you so much for your contributions to this and always telling the truth and standing up for biblical values and being a really excellent reporter. And, this is such a great and fascinating book. So thanks so much for your time. Great to see you, my friend.
Bless you, Jenna. Thank you so much. Shalom from Jerusalem.
Vaccines have not eliminated the Chinese Fauci virus, so we all need extra protection for our immune systems. My friends at Centurion Labs have combined 5 key ingredients to defend your immune system against allergies, cold, the flu, and even the coronavirus. It's called Centurion Defender, and it incorporates vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, copper, and quercetin in just 1 capsule. No more swallowing 10 pills a day or not taking supplements because the individual cost is just too high. So take 1 Defender with breakfast and 1 with dinner and keep living your life. Just like the Centurions of Rome led by example and held themselves to the highest possible standards, Centurion Labs has dedicated the last 15 years to research and develop safe, effective, and affordable healthcare products made in the USA that you can trust. For a limited time, listeners of this show can save 20% off their first order of Centurion Defender. Visit centurionlabs.com/Jenna and use the promo code JENNA. Defend your health today with Centurion Defender. That's centurionlabs.com/Jenna and the promo code Jenna. Centurion Labs, that's with an S, centurionlabs.com/JENNA.